My name's Steve Worcester, and today we're going to talk about taking your hobby and turning it into a business. Stick around. So you've decided that you want to take your hobby and make it into a business. Well, let's look at what that takes. It isn't that difficult. It just requires a little bit of planning. So the first thing you may want to do is write a business plan. That's kind of up to you. If you think you're going to be looking for capital or investors or something like that, then you'll definitely want a business plan. And then outside of that, why would you want to make your hobby into a business? The first reason is deductions. You're going to be able to write off a lot of the products that you use. Now we have to do this obviously in a legal manner. So the first thing you may want to do is get a couple of IRS publications. IRS publication 334 is a tax guide for small businesses, and IRS publication 535 is business expenses. In addition to that, I would recommend you download Schedule C from the IRS and look at how they categorize different write-offs, deductions, whatever you want to call them. After you've done that, you get an idea of where you can put things in which little file cabinets. Then your local city or state may require you to get a business license. Check with your local area and see if that's something that you need to do. Then you may want to file a fictitious name, which is also called an assumed name in some places. If it's going to be Madeira Creations, which was actually one of my first businesses, then you go down to your county office, you fill out a form, you tell them what type of business entity you want to be. Typically it's going to be a sole proprietorship or an LLC, a limited liability corporation. So you'll want to plan that out first. You fill out that paperwork and you walk out with your DBA, AKA whatever you want to call it. And then what I would recommend you do is get a business checking account. There is certainly a level of legitimacy when you have a business checking account. In fact, some areas require that. You certainly want to have a way to separate your personal finances from your business finances so that you know which way is up, how the business is going. And then from there, I would highly recommend that you get a reseller permit. If your state requires you to take sales tax with the sale of a product, then you're going to need to have that if you start doing shows or something like that. And then you generally are going to have to file your tax report quarterly or yearly. Usually yearly is only for larger businesses, but I find it beneficial because that way I don't get caught upside down maybe at the end of the year because I owe more than I have in the checking account or something like that. All right. So the benefit here is now that we can write off deductions and you look at your Schedule C and you figure out what the different categories are for write-offs, then you're going to want to keep some kind of books. So you could do a QuickBooks online, a QuickBooks or something like that. Look at the cost of that. Or you could just simply keep spreadsheets. You could basically have a spreadsheet with all the categories that you're going to use on the Schedule C and then just write in your entries every month in your ledger and then use that and add it up so that you can do your Schedule C at the end of the year. It's very important that you have good bookkeeping so that you know right off in the case of an audit or something like that exactly where every penny went and how you can prove it. Unfortunately, that's our litigious society, and the way things work anymore is you have to have that proof. Basically, you can keep all those receipts. A lot of receipts now are sent via email, so you could just take those and put them into a section on your computer, make them to back. Make sure you back up your computer, though. All right. So then one of the things that comes up often is, how do I price my work? Where do I sell my work? So initially when I got into doing shows, I did everything. I did everything from churches to trade days to trying to get into art shows, etc. And there is certainly a process behind it. And depending upon your area, wood may not be a great seller, but you know, you need to go get into that and you need to look into that. What I would recommend is get something like publication like Sunshine Artist and look at different shows and then kind of get an idea of, if you're going to do shows, you know, what is the startup cost for something like that. So to do shows, you're going to need a booth, and the quality of the booth and the displays goes in direct correlation to the quality of the show itself. You're not going to present yourself as well at a fine art show with just a bunch of tables with Home Depot tablecloths or something on it. You want to have a booth that shows the same kind of pomp that your work does at that level. At a rummage sale or, you know, a boot sale, if you're in the UK, then, you know, it's a little bit easier. You can get away with different signage and things like that. When you start doing bigger outdoor shows, you're going to want a high quality tent and very nice displays. Here's some of the displays I used.
It started off pretty simple, had an easy up beginning, and they got torn up really bad. Then I went to this much better tent and had this modular display. It was really easy to put up and take down. Then added pedestals and a rug. Eventually the rug gets thrashed. Then this was a modular design that allowed me to put it up in about 3 or 4 hours. It was floating shelves that were on a pegbook in the background. So it took a while to make it, and the concept, and then execution worked out really well. As you can see, it gave a gallery-ish feel to it. Eventually that large piece got hung in the back like you saw in the previous one. And then you have to make sure that you have really heavy weights. Oh, and don't forget about all the friends you're going to make while you're at these art shows. Hi, Marty.
When I was doing shows, I got to the point I did about 16 shows, was the most I did in 1 year. And it is a backbreaker. You know, you have yourself and your wife, or yourself and a helper, setting up a show. You set up on Friday, you get it all ready Friday night. You open Saturday and Sunday, you tear down Sunday, you take it all home, you know, and you start over for the next weekend. So the first thing, though, is you have to be able to get into those shows. Definitely one of the ways to help you do that is high quality photographs. Whether you take those yourself or you have a photographer take them for you. When you're submitting to a show, you know, you have about 30 seconds to impress the judge. The judge may know nothing about wood turning. They may be a judge, you know, normally say a painter or a sculptor or a glass artist or whatever, and they know nothing about wood turning. So you need to impress them in 30 seconds or so with your photography. If you have bad photography, you're going to get disqualified all the time. I see photos quite often of pictures that have scratches on them, or the bull they photographed is dusty or out of focus. You know, you're going to want to make sure that that photo that you're submitting represents the quality of your work. Now, we used to say that there was craft shows and there's art shows, and there's definitely a difference between them. We used to say that if you're doing a show with iguanas on a stick, you know, where they got the foam iguanas, you're going to have a different clientele than you would at a fine art show. Not that there's anything wrong with those. I did a local balloon festival year after year, and used to sell ceiling fan poles. They were made from cutoffs, quick spindle work, and I would sell 150 of them during a show at $5 a piece. It paid my entry, and basically more than all my fees, just that one item. And then the ability to sell more bowls and get into maybe somebody who walks by that works for a retail establishment. And another option is to use something like Etsy. Now, I haven't used Etsy, but the times I've looked through it, one of the problems is it's easy to get lost, or in this case, it's easy to not be found on Etsy because there's a lot of people selling the same thing. Look at pizza cutters or pens or something like that, and you get an idea of, how do you stand out in that kind of environment. The other thing is to get, look at some of the free things, advertising, so to speak, just by being a presence on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, etc. There's something to be had for that for sure. And then the other thing is your own website. And so with your own website, there's enough tools nowadays to make it pretty simple to go off and create a website. You're going to want to buy a domain name, which is the name. Hopefully you can do it the same as your DBA, your assumed name. What you don't want to do with a domain name is make it so many letters or so frustrating to type out or easy to misspell. Like Steve Worcester woodturning, nobody would ever spell Worcester right, so they'd never find me. Google would say, "Are you looking for Worcester?" No, I'm not. I'm looking for Steve Worcester. Anyway, so that's another thing to take into account is look at a web presence, etc. You don't necessarily even need to sell off that web presence, but having something where somebody can go and they see representatives of your work, even if it's sold products, but it gives them an idea of what you're capable of. So what we should talk about then is overhead. It's like, well, I've already paid for my lathe, I've paid for my, bandsaw or whatever, So we should talk about then is overhead. You have overhead. Regardless of what you think, you have overhead. You've already paid for a lathe. Let's say that was $1,000. And you have a shop that you maybe can't write it off because it's attached to the house or something like that. But certainly that's overhead. The electricity that you're using is overhead. The phone bills, the cell phone, all of that's overhead that you got to take care of. It is easy to just say I don't have overhead and I could sell this bowl. I got the wood for free, so I could sell the bowl for $20. But at the same time, if you think about it, is I have to make enough money to make this business viable. You don't want to go into creating a business only to make it not profitable almost intentionally. You have to think profitable. You can't think that everybody says, I don't have any overhead. Well, sure you have overhead. Even an internet business has overhead. You have the cost of the software you're using. Maybe you're using software to design. Maybe you're using Adobe products to make your business cards or to photograph and fix your photographs that you're putting into shows. That's overhead. You have a computer in there. That's overhead. All of it is overhead, and you need to look at it that way. The last thing I would talk about then is another venue to look at is galleries. So a lot of galleries now have gone to virtual, which makes it fairly easy for the artist. It makes it kind of difficult for an unestablished artist, though, because when somebody is going to a website, they're looking for a John Jordan, a Trent Bosch, an Ellsworth. They're looking for a high-end collector is looking at that name and sees the long-term purchase of it. What I generally do is I like to look through, not necessarily to get design ideas, but to get maybe inspirations. So with a gallery, though, if there's galleries in your area, what you want to look at is how much of the sale price are they getting for it? Is it 50%? Is it on consignment? Are they buying it up front, which is ideal? Because that way you've already sold it, you have the money in your pocket, and it's not sitting on their table or in the back room, or even worse, for months before it gets out on the floor and somebody can purchase it. Another thing is, is it more of an antique mall, or is it an actual art gallery, or even a food utensil place, someplace, high-end, like if you could get into sur la table and sell wood bowls, that would be ideal, because that way you have a higher end clientele and you have a venue to move the product in. So you need to look at that. And then for those types of things, then you also have to have inventory, which is overhead. So you have to be able to make sure that a customer who comes in and they sell out the gallery or venue that you're using, then you have inventory to restock that gallery. Or even for a show, it was always funny that somebody would say, oh yeah, I heard about this guy coming in and they bought everything in the tent. It's like, that doesn't happen. I don't care what anybody says, that doesn't happen. And if it happened, then what about the next show next week? Did you bring everything to that show and you sold it all? Then what are you going to do at the next show? So it's a matter of having to refill that inventory as well. And as you get better at it, the first one you make is always going to take considerably longer than the next one you make. And then they get consistently faster and faster, and generally the quality of the product gets better as well. Okay, so another thing is, how do I get more ideas? How do I look at things that, how do I want to represent myself? How do I want my booth to look? Walk around at art shows. Generally the art shows are free, and depending upon where you live, Florida, there's lots of art shows year round. Everywhere else, it's based on the weather. But that'll give you an idea of what different booth styles look like. Because when somebody walks into your booth, that is a representative of who you and your art are. You have to start looking at it as like, this is a personal representation. If you're somebody who doesn't like to talk directly to the public, I'm not sure an art show is probably the best venue for you, because there's definitely some salesmanship involved. So what you may want to do though is look at the magazine Sunshine Artist. They have a website that's fabulous for things like that. It'll give you an idea. There's articles on how to make the best, trade show booth, as they call it. And shows different fine art shows in your area. In looking at these shows, look at their past shows if it's still up, and see how many people were in your category. A lot of times they will only have, let's say they have 250 artists and they have 10 different categories. They may only accept up to 25 in each category, or they may heavy load in, say, painting and photography, and then low load in wood, and they may combine wood as in mixed media or wood, etc. I was fortunate to be in some fine art shows, and I did pretty well at them, to the point where at one show I got best of show 1 year, and I got best of category wood 2 years. But there was other shows in my area that I applied to a dozen times and never even got a look. And it's kind of frustrating because, you always think you have the best art around. It's kind of frustrating because you're walking around and you're seeing the level of the other artists there, and you think, well, why can't I do that? And the other thing you need to think about is, when you're making things, is what are you charging for it? I was at a fine art show, and there was a really good segmented artist, and he had the pieces up there, and it said how many hours were in each piece. And if you did the math, he was getting about $3 an hour or $5 an hour, something like that. So you need to make sure that you're able to make up your time as well as cover the overhead that I talked about earlier. So in doing that, you want to make sure that you're priced well for that venue. Every venue may be different. You know, you don't want to walk around in the same city, do shows in the same city, you know, and you're selling a bowl for $100 at one show and you're only selling it for $50 at the other, because what if, you know, one of your customers came up that bought it for $100 and says, well, wait a minute, you know. The other thing is there's sometimes some bargaining involved. Multiple pieces may bring the price down, the total price. As well as there are people who are going to say that they do wholesale. And if they do wholesale, fine. You know, say, you know, what I'd really like to do is come down, look at your facility, you know, see what you're doing, what other artists, what other media you have in there, you know, because they may not do wood, but that's fine. Maybe they want to get into wood. And so that's something you might want to look into as well. But go through Sunshine Artists, see what shows are in your area if you want to do shows. But remember that if you're going to do a show, what you need to do is you need a high quality tent, generally a nice banner. You want beautiful displays if you're going to do a really fine art show. You want probably even lighting, even though you're outdoors. I took lighting a lot because I want to have a nice daylight light when you're in there. And shows in Texas can get notoriously hot. So I also had fans. But you want to make sure that all of this is portraying the image that you want to portray for your own work. And sometimes that can take a little bit of tweaking, but art shows can be really beneficial, very validating, and there's some times where it can be really frustrating. So you just kind of have to have a good attitude, you know, just being out there, getting some critiques on your work and selling some product, and hopefully you'll come back and you're excited to go do the same show next year. And when you're at that show, generally you're going to want to have business cards. And what I would recommend is you do a sign-up list so people can, you can start to create a mailing list so that when you're at that same show next year or another show in that same town, then you can email the people that you saw at that show and say, hey, you know, come out and look at these new products I have, or, you know, how my art has evolved and things like that. Now, if you're going to get a booth at like a local antique mall or something like that, that's fine, but you need to look at how your product's going to be positioned, how it's going to be displayed, and how much that's going to cost. Once again, that space is going to be overhead, and then the inventory you put in there is going to be overhead. And how do they deal with shrinkage? So if something gets stolen out of your booth, you know, that's on you. So you need to make sure that you know all of those things up front and how that's going to be dealt with. Galleries. So honestly, one place I didn't have great success in was galleries. I got into galleries, I just didn't sell well in galleries. And for whatever reason, some of it probably is that I just didn't push that hard. I didn't want to get into a lot of galleries. Having to produce work all the time can put a negative pressure on you sometimes. And in my case, I had a full-time job. So my hobby was a business indeed, but I didn't want it to become my livelihood. It was great to have that. I know people who do really well in galleries, selling pieces that are, you know, $6,000 and $8,000. But it's not something that I was going to be good at. With that said, galleries now can have a brick and mortar, or they can be online. I've seen a lot of online galleries lately. What you want to do is contact the gallery, tell them you would like to be in their gallery, and offer to send them a resume and quality photographs. Once again, it goes back to a quality photograph. You gotta have a great photograph. multiple photographs. And some of that may be on your website as well. Then once you're into the gallery, you need to understand, well, before you get into the gallery, you want to understand is how's the sales structure? You know, are they going to get a percentage, or are they actually buying it up front? If they get a percentage, a lot of times they will also discount it to some of their best customers. You know, so if you have a bowl in there that's $200 and they're going to give 10% off to that customer, who loses in that scenario? Does the artist take a 10% cut, or is the artist taking half of that? You know, and what's the commission structure? How much am I getting paid, you know, for this $200 bowl? Will it be out on the show floor all the time? What happens when somebody drops it and breaks it? Are they insured for that, or is it your problem? You know, these are things that you want to understand up front so there's no surprises. Galleries can be a great place, and it doesn't necessarily even be an art gallery. It could be high-end kitchen shops and things like that. Those are also places. But it has to be someone, you know, that understands the product enough to where they can be a salesperson inside that venue for you as well. Some of that may be educating them on you. I've seen, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, in Oregon and Washington, I've seen fantastic galleries just in the airport. And then, you know, they'll have these great venues that are very wood-centric because there is a lot of wood art that's sold up in that area, as well as glass art. You know, there is a lot of glass shops up in Oregon and Washington. It helps them keep warm in the winter, I guess. All right, so with all that said, look at how you're going to plan all this out. If nothing else, you've got some tips on, you know, things that you can do, get the information you need up front so that you're a little bit more informed on how to approach, say, a gallery, or how to get into an art show. You know, a craft show is going to be different than an art show. There's still money to be made, but you know, you're going to have a hard time selling a multi-$1,000 vase at a craft show, but you may be able to sell more pens and small boxes. And you know, it's always nice to have a lower end item that somebody can be at that show and get a memento of the time that they had there. So hopefully this helped out. If you have any questions, comment below if this is on YouTube, and have a great day. Be kind, turn wood, stay awesome. Thanks.